All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everybody to the Austin DFW San Antonio Tug for January. My name's Chris Monahan. I'll be your MC today. Happy New Year, everybody. It seems a little strange to say that. We're halfway through January already, but I hope everybody had great holidays. We got a big event planned for you today. We have a special speaker with us who's going to be showing us the best features that you can find in 2021.4. But before we get started, as always, I like to plug my friends on the advisory council here. These are the wonderful people that always help every single month to put this event together. They're behind the scenes, like lighting up speakers, thinking of topics, participating in the panels. So they're wonderful in what they do, and they all bring their special expertise. So if you're interested in joining our advisory council, please reach out to one of us. And we'd be happy to send you some information. I'd like to give a special thanks to Amy Wu today, who lined up our guest speaker. So thank you, Amy. All right, so let's talk about the agenda a little bit. So I'll first start off with a couple of housekeeping announcements, and then we'll have our featured speaker, Tim Ngwena, Tim is, you might know him as Tableau Tim. If you have ever watched YouTube and Googled Tableau, you will find his videos. They are excellent. If you have not seen them before, I recommend you check them out. But he is going to tell us all the best features of 2021.4. If you might recall, we had a panel last November, and we sort of showed you some of those highlights. So it was all in sort of principle, and now you're going to see it in practice. So this is going to be something you don't want to miss. And after our presentation, we'll have some Q&A. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and address them to Homer Hegedus. He's going to be our co-host today. And then after the presentation, stick around. We're going to do a network breakout sessions. We do the breakout rooms in Zoom. We're going to have one that is Ask Me Anything, which is basically any questions about Tableau in general. And then we're going to also do a strategy and adoption room as well. So please stick around for that. So the meeting format, as always, for those that are new, is this is a web meeting, so it is live. The best way to watch it, obviously, is to do gallery mode. You can see everyone's faces. Please go on video if you want. Please mute your Zoom during the calls, and if you'd like to ask a question, you can ask that at the end. Also, participate in the chat window. We always get a lot of chatter down in the chat window, so if you think something's cool, definitely call it out. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of that going on during this presentation. As I mentioned, we'll have the questions at the end. And then I'll also post a survey so everyone can give their feedback about the presentation after the event. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we jump to our presentation. We have our February Tug coming up on February 10th. It's going to be really awesome. We have our own local speaker here in February, Prakar Bajpai, who is a data analyst from the city of Austin. He's going to explain to us sort of how the city of Austin uses Tableau. So it's definitely an event you don't want to miss as well. And our upcoming events, we do have our February event, which we had hoped to be in person, but obviously, things change by the second here in COVID world. So we're respecting social distancing, and we're going to make our February and March events virtual right now until we can go ahead and do in-person events, hopefully here soon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim. And Tim is a Zen master based out of the UK, and he works at the Information Lab. And he's been using Tableau for over 8 years. And like I said, he runs a fabulous YouTube channel. So if you have not checked it out, please Google it, or you can visit tableautim.com, and you will learn a lot of amazing things about Tableau. So without further ado, Tim, I'll turn it over to you.
Cheers, thank you. Let me start sharing my screen and make sure everyone can see everything okay. So can you see my screen okay?
Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent. So thank you. Thanks for having me at this Tug. It's an absolute pleasure for the record to be at user groups. I think it's one of the best ways to not only, showcase what Tableau can do, but also, actually get challenged on some of those things. Because when you work as a consultant, sometimes you work in an isolated sort of solo perspective. You think everything's great, but you go out, talk to people, you get to smell the coffee. So feel free to challenge me in the questions as we go through this stuff. They can come in as and when, and during the Q&A we can handle them. Now 21.4 was released just before Christmas. I think just before Christmas, everyone got sidetracked by another issue, which I won't bring up now. But nonetheless, there's a whole bunch of stuff in here that I think there were kind of really nice features to finish off the year. If I just scroll down the page to this little sort of setup they have here at Tableau, I'll annotate what I'm going to cover in detail today, and we can, of course, sort of go off track and cover other things. But I think one of the things that people have been looking forward to for a long time is virtual connections. Virtual connections were actually demoed 4 years ago at conference. So it's not something that just sort of popped up this year. There was actually a very early demo of what it looked like 4 years ago. And at that point, for some reason, it never sort of made it into the final product from that particular conference. So it's sort of reappeared as a add-on that is included in the data management add-on. And so technically speaking, centralized row level security is actually part of the data management add-on, but in many ways, you'd only really use a virtual connection if you wanted to use centralized row level security. So centralized row level security is basically the ability to control security at a row level, but this is built into the Tableau ecosystem. It's sort of native in the implementation rather than doing some of these, let's say, complex hacks that we've had to do in the past with calculations, with data source filters, and sometimes with databases as well in conjunction with that. And it kind of takes the best of Tableau. It uses all the things we're used to now, like the data model as well. And that's sort of a really powerful feature. So I'll show you that. A small quality of life improvement we got was the ability to edit published data sources. So I'll actually start with this a little today. And then the last one is this one just down here at the bottom. I'll clear my annotation so I can scroll down. This one at the bottom, multi-data source support in map layers. This is actually, it seems small, but it's actually a huge deal if you spend a lot of time working with spatial data and mapping, because up until now, what you've had to do is put everything you need into one connection. Whereas with this, your connections don't need to have any sort of relationship whatsoever to be used as part of the same context. Your map is the common context for your visualization. So I'll show you a bit of that. Now, one last thing I'm going to show you is I'm not going to do any of this in desktop. So I've been a big proponent of Tableau Online and using the browser. I appreciate today there's an issue with Tableau Online in the American Tableau Online instance. But for me, at least here in the UK, I'm on the Dublin instance over here. So everything seems to be working fine. So I'm actually going to do everything in the browser. I have got a backup in Tableau Desktop available. So everything you're going to see me do is going to be in the browser. That's actually where virtual connections and many of the features I'm talking about live anyway. So that makes the most sense for today. So I'll get started first with I'm just going to start with a published data source. One of the things that sometimes people don't realize is you can actually create a published data source right from Server or Tableau Online. So when you go to this little drop down here, you have a bunch of options. And it's interesting, over the last few releases, this little drop down, things you can start in the browser have actually exploded. So it used to just be a project and a workbook in this drop down. And now you can create pretty much all the key asset types that you'd want in Tableau. So the first thing I'm going to do is just select the published data source. And what Tableau does is it actually brings the connection window that you're sort of familiar with. For this one, I'm going to connect to a Snowflake instance that I have access to. It's actually my own personal Snowflake instance. So I'll go ahead and select Snowflake, and I'll grab my server details just from my screen over here and paste them in, and my username. I think Snowflake is actually quite a nice database to sort of start learning SQL with, if that makes sense, because it's quite easy. It just works in the browser, and it's quite cheap actually to sort of test and use as an individual. So I think I spend something like 40 British pounds a month on my Snowflake instance, and it manages all the data from my YouTube channel and so on and so forth. So if you're looking for a database that's affordable for you to sort of just have a go, this is a really nice thing to do. Obviously, I've got my password, so let's just type this again. Should be right now. Cool. So I've typed in my password, I've logged in. I'm going to ask Tableau not to remember my password. And now I'm connected to Snowflake. Again, this is all in the browser. And one of the things you have to do with Snowflake is, choose your warehouse and your database. Warehouses in Snowflake are very different to other databases. So I won't bore you with this sort of complexity now. All you need to know is that the warehouse just decides how much resource is going into that particular query. So for this one, I have one set up called compute. And I have a demo database, which is just loaded up some sample data that was given in the 21.4 beta, specifically for showing off virtual connections and centralized row level security. And I'll just select the standard schema. And you can see that I actually have some connections here. So I'll do what you normally do with Superstore. I'll just drag orders into the canvas, and you can see my connection comes up. It's exactly the same as the desktop connection interface. You can see everything is here. But one of the interesting things with a published data source is, of course, the next step doesn't require you to build a visualization. So the Tableau interface has something interesting here called a scratchpad. And this is essentially where in a published data source, you can test your calculations, you can test everything before you then save that particular thing. So what I can do is I can actually go over to my scratchpad, having connected to everything I need. I'll keep it a live connection, and you can start to add calculations, change things and visualize them and see that everything is working. And so this is actually very smart, because I was worried that you'd have to create a sheet and all it would do is not save the sheet, but actually it just creates a sort of notepad that you can use. So you can create a calculation. I'll just call this test, and I'll give it a function of today. That will just give us today's date, nice and simple. And once you've done that, you can now publish this data source to the service. So I'll just go publish as. I'll call this demo published data source. And that's now that that's done, you publish it up, everything's been published up successfully, and it's there. If I go back to my little folder and I refresh this, this is the project that I've created for this demo. You can see that it's just there. So demo published data source. I can, of course, keep this open, make changes, keep adding to it, and keep publishing it. And once I'm actually in this particular data source, if I actually go to it, I have the ability to edit the data source. Now, for me, it's grayed out because of my credentials and the way that I've set up this particular Tableau Online instance. But if your security and permissions were set up correctly, then essentially this would always be available for you to edit that data source. And then you'd just be able to go back in, change your published data source, and all the changes you make propagate into any workbook or anything that's connected specifically to that published data source. So no more having to bring the published data source into a local instance in your desktop, make the change, then republish it back over the existing one. It's gone from about being, I think it was 9 to 11 steps, I can't remember the exact number, to just being a simple step now, maybe 2 or 3 steps to change something in a published data source. So that's, I think, a huge quality of life improvement. So that's sort of the first thing, just being able to edit that. And I think this has been a long asked for feature. I can't believe how long it's taken to sort of arrive. What is interesting is that it's arrived at the same time as a new type of connection, which is what I think is the confusing thing. So let me close this published data source here, and let's just go back to the 2014 folder that I've created for this demo. So one of the new things you can create is a virtual connection. You can see that it's this particular asset type here. And the best way to think of a virtual connection is, instead of having to manage, let's say, a bunch of published data sources, you can essentially create one centralized connection to a database. You can either have master credentials that are shared by everyone. You could ask that people log in with their own credentials. Whatever it is, you're creating one place. So rather than having maybe 20, 30 connections, you just have one connection. And everyone's access to that data source is managed through this connection. So let me show you how that works. Let me just show you how that gets created. So I'll go ahead and select virtual connection. You see that you get the same interface that you're sort of used to, except for this time you have a list of connections. What is interesting about this at the moment, and I'm purely speculative here, is that they are calling out the developers at this present moment in time. And of course, all of them are Tableau, because Tableau have built these connectors. But what you'd have to assume and hope is that third parties can actually come in here and add their own connectors in this particular case, especially with the announcement of things like the Tableau economy. You might find third parties creating their own bespoke connectors, as they've already enabled through the connector SDK. So that's something I hope to see in the future, a lot more connections than these ones. Because this is a limited list compared to what you're used to seeing inside of the product itself. But the key thing here is we're doing all of this again. I'll keep reminding you in the browser. I'm not using desktop whatsoever. So I'll go ahead and I'm going to connect to exactly the same database as I connected to before. So I'll just grab my credentials again and we'll log in. And the thing to be aware of is that this is going to be used by everyone. So the username and password, everything that I put into this is going to be used by everyone. Okay. And then Tableau will manage and remember who's connecting to the data source and when. So everything on the left-hand side, it kind of looks similar to what I just showed you with the published data source. It's just a different color. It almost looks identical to Tableau Prep, if I'm honest. Tableau Prep has this sort of blue control bar on the left-hand side, which is great. Maybe that's where the designers come from. I'm not sure. But I'll go ahead and connect to the same demo database. However, this is where things get completely different. With a published data source, what you have to do is create your whole connection and publish that up as a holistic thing. However, with a virtual connection, you don't have to do that. With a virtual connection, you can essentially just add tables to your connection and then let the user decide which tables they're going to use when they actually come to build the final product. So if I drag employees into the mix, invoices into the mix, and orders, you can see that all three tables are now available, and you can see that they're available because I have this visibility column ticked. What this also means is if you do some quality assurance or you do some checks, you can actually then consequently make a table hidden whilst you make some changes to it. Maybe it's down for maintenance, and then make it visible again without having to reissue connections and tell people, oh, okay, the scheme has changed and so on and so forth. Just no messy work having to go and replace connections inside of Workbook. So you just stick with one connection and it basically has a life, it has versions, and it sort of gets perpetuated as things change, which is a really, really good quality of life improvement. There's a couple of other things on here that are sort of, worth maybe highlighting a little later when we start looking at policies. But in essence, you get the basic information about your connection. You have the option over here on the right-hand side of choosing whether it's live or an extract. So if I go to this drop down, you'll see that I can obviously make the choice with this one because I'm using Snowflake, and my Snowflake instance is in Ireland and Tableau Online is in Ireland. I know that the live connection is just going to be blazing fast because it's moving through the AWS's own internet connection rather than having to traverse the whole internet. So I'll keep it live because that's honestly just going to be just fine in this particular case. If I was working with something more a little bit slower, then I might choose an extract. But for now, this is fine. So I'll just go ahead and just publish this up so we can just see what this looks like. I won't sort of do any fancy thing to it. So I'll call this tug demo. Hit publish to that folder. And now that that virtual connection is published, I'm not going to close this. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back here and I'm going to refresh this. And you'll see that we now have the new item over here. So it has this sort of database icon and it comes up in the list. If I switch to the grid view, it also has a slightly bigger icon. So you can maybe see the icon design a little bit better there. Now, what's great about this is if I want to now build using that connection, I can just go in here, again in the browser, and I can just sort of create a new workbook. I can also create a prep flow from this. And if I didn't just search for tug demo and hit search, I spelled something wrong. So let's try that again. I think I might be searching in the wrong place. Here we go. So I needed to go to the drop down and make sure that I was actually selecting the virtual connection. And you can see that this is the connection I've literally just created. So it will not let me select it. There we go. So it's having a slight bug there with the selection, but we managed to get through it, thank God. Let's hit connect. Okay, it's being a little bit temperamental with the click, so let me try this again. Here we go. There we go. Okay, everything's working again. Thank God. Please don't fail on me. So here we are. We're in the virtual connection. And what you hopefully notice straight away is that on the left, these are the three tables that I made visible. So what I don't have to do, I didn't have to type in my credentials. I didn't have to do anything. It's using all the credentials that I put into that virtual connection. And everyone who has access to that virtual connection would get the same experience. So if you have a team of analysts or people who are using the same data source and you want them to go through one connection, this is the way to do it. And they can, of course, come in here and build their own data models as normal. There's sort of nothing different about that part of this interface. It works exactly as you'd expect. In fact, it's probably a little bit easier because you know people are connected to the right thing at the right time. Now, what is interesting about this is I can go back to my published connection and I can sort of start to give it a bit more of a life. So let's go ahead and make these invisible. And when I do that, a couple of things happen. Okay, I can save this. And when I save this, you'll notice up here that it says it saved a draft. What's interesting about that is it's not published that change yet. So when you save a draft, it's like you're at your desk, you just want to save your changes so far, but you don't want to share those changes with absolutely everyone. So those changes haven't been pushed to everyone. They're only pushed to everyone once you actually go up here to the right and hit publish. I found this mechanic slightly confusing because nowhere else in Tableau is that the mechanic at the moment. So it's a very subtle thing just to be aware of. When you hit save, you're not saving it as such, you're saving a draft. And when you hit publish, you're actually making the change, you're actually saving it so other people see the same output. So this time when I hit publish, it's going to publish that connection. You can see here that it says publish the virtual connection. So now this has actually saved over the connection. And if we go back and we refresh this, I might have to leave this connection and go back just so you can see that. Don't save that. Let's go back into my folder, build a new workbook, go to virtual connection, grab the tug. You can see that that change is now there. Okay, so you can see it's just got the invoices table. So that change I made has now sort of propagated through. I don't know if that refresh issue is something that's not instantaneous or you have to close the window and start again if you make a change while people are in it. The mechanics of that aren't completely clear at the moment to me, at least because I haven't had a chance to use it since Christmas. So I'll find that out in due course. But nonetheless, I think it's actually an important thing to bear in mind, because if you imagine lots of tables in a connection, and you maybe want to phase them in, you might bring all the tables in, but only make them visible once they've gone through like a QA process. And that's actually quite a nice feature to be able to just come in here, switch the visibility. As long as you've got governance behind that process, you can make that available to everyone very easily. And that becomes a good thing. A couple of other things you can do here, which will be useful when we start to talk about centralized row-level security, is when you click on each of these, you obviously get a little preview at the bottom, like you do in Tableau Prep. So again, a lot of interface copied from Tableau Prep here. You can switch to a table view, which gives you a view of those particular tables. And you notice you get a little summary here as well. You do get that sort of aggregated view as well from Tableau Prep that we're used to seeing. That sort of snuck in here as well. So if I just go in, I think I haven't, I need to select a few things here. So if I select three things here, you see you get that sort of summarized bar chart that you're used to getting at the top of Tableau Prep if you're working with data as well. So that's a nice quality of life improvement. It can kind of save you the hassle of having to connect to the connection just to check and see if something's wrong with your data, or if it's the right set of data, or if a particular dimension hasn't been added to the table. You can do all of that without having to, create a workbook, as it were, and create yet more junk on your server. So that's a really nice thing to see. Okay, so that's the virtual connection in a nutshell. It's very similar to a published data source. It just doesn't have the niceties and smarts of a virtual connection. So in many ways, at least for now, I don't think there's much distinction between the two. That said, because it's part of the data management add-on, and Tableau has this recent trend of adding things over time, I would expect more to be added to this. I don't have any sort of clue what that might be, but I would expect more to be added to virtual connections in due course. So that's the virtual connection, and virtual connections are a prerequisite for the next thing, which is centralized row-level security. Now, at a very high level, centralized row-level security is sort of, it's a really interesting concept, because in some instances, it can actually be more hassle than it's worth. A lot of organizations will just sort of jump out the gate requiring the highest form of security, centralized row-level security across everything. And actually, you don't need it, because you might have a business model where everyone can see all the data anyway, so you don't really need to worry about data sets, as it were. But in cases where it's necessary, this feature, I think, is going to save a lot of hassle. Okay, so let me show you how it works. And there's sort of three modes to the centralized row-level security setup that Tableau have implemented. So if I go to the data policies tab, you can see here that, again, it's borrowing from Tableau Prep. We have tabs that take you to different sections. I'm curious to know what they're going to add over here. But nonetheless, data policies have their own tab. And when I first heard about this, I almost thought about it like security policies in AWS. Security policies in AWS allow you to specify what resources someone can have access to in the AWS cloud structure. With this, what I can do is I can go ahead and create a new policy. And what you saw me do there was just click a button and it opened up this interface across the middle here. So this is where you sort of edit and create your policies. I'll give you sort of the anatomy of this first before I show you how it works. In the first step, you bring in your tables. This is where you bring in anything that's going to be used in your policy. In step 2, you write your policy. So this is actually where you write the conditions. If you've done a centralized row level security using other techniques, the calculations you would have written in the past would live in this particular step. And you have your sort of familiar reference area for calculations here. Anything that you might want to use in a calculation for data policies all live here. And you have your sort of preview at the bottom, which I've already showed you, but the key thing here is the fact that you've got the ability to preview your policy that I'm highlighting it here in blue, and you can preview it as you, or you can preview it as a generic user, okay? So let me clear the annotations and let me also delete that policy so that we start from scratch. I'll just go ahead and remove this so we have this interface again. Another way you can get that up is if you just start dragging. Okay, that's not doing what I thought it would do. Let me try that again. No, I'm one step ahead of myself there. If you create a new policy, then start dragging, you get this sort of interface, okay? And it's a little bit cut off because I've moved this bottom interface up. So if I bring it here, you see you get these two options. You get the ability to add a policy table or add an entitlement table. An entitlement table is essentially a table that defines people's access to something. So we won't use that just yet. We'll do the two basic tables first. And what I'll do is I'll drag orders and invoices. And you can see that they both appear in here as part of my policy table, okay? Now, at release, there is a restriction that a table can only be part of one policy. So unfortunately, you can't create multiple policies that affect a single table. One table can only be in one policy at a time. So to keep this simple, I'm just going to remove invoices. And once you've brought your table in, the next step is to add a column to map. Essentially, what you're telling Tableau here is which column here is going to be used to specify my security model. So let's go ahead and add that. And you'll see that we get this policy column here, okay? And in this policy column, you simply choose a column. So that's as simple as that. So let's go ahead and choose a city. Let's find one. Let's choose ship city. That sounds good. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch to the preview variable here, so I can make sure that I choose a ship city that actually exists. So I'll go with this one here at the top, REIMS. I don't know how to say that. It's French. If anyone who's French has a phonetic way of saying that in the chat, let me know. But nonetheless, we'll go with this. So ship city is what I'm going to use with my policy column. And I'm going to just rename this so that it matches what I've just said, because essentially what happens is that this naming here, this column naming here is actually what you use in this description. You don't use this particular one here. I'm naming it exactly the same, but that's just so I don't get confused. I don't know why that's a requirement at the moment, but nonetheless, if I start typing here, you'll see that it actually gets my function and entitlement from the policy columns there. I could also reference fields that are existing over here as well. So that's just how this sort of view is broken up. So let's go ahead and say ship city equals, and we can just go ahead and just manually specify REIMS. Okay. So that's good. You can see my calculation is valid. It gives me that little indicator as you would get in Tableau. And now that that's done, you obviously want to preview this and make sure that it's worked. It's not previewing at the moment. So there's a little tick box here where you can say, okay, preview this with a policy applied. So let's go ahead and do that. And it will go ahead and preview it as a user. Because this is a live connection, this might take a little bit of time, but it should be fine. Trust in the Amazon backbone network here. Hope it works quickly. What I might do, there you go, it's worked fine. I was going to change it to my specific username, but we don't need to do that at this present time. We're fine. So here you are. You can see that it's working. Very simple. 5 rows out of 830 from this particular table. And that's my data policy. I can go in here, rename this and call it REIMS. Hit enter. And if I now go to my policy list, it's there and it's available. Okay. Now, what I would love is to be able to create lots of policies for different cities and then give specific access to those people. But again, remember what I said, a table can only be part of one policy. I don't know why that is, but if they release that restriction, then actually policies could become really powerful like they are in other technologies. So that's the sort of the first basic instantiation of row level security, literally typing in a condition that restricts the data set to one particular thing. Another one is a lot simpler, actually just as simple. Create a new policy. For this one, I'm going to bring my invoices table in. And if you look at my invoices table, let's just go ahead and the invoice table doesn't appear because there are errors in the policy condition correct because I haven't written a policy. So let's go ahead and delete these and create a new policy. Remove my little preview. I find like you have to reset things a little bit here. And let's go ahead, click on this. Okay, let's just make sure this one actually wants to do what I want it to do. Let's hit refresh. There we go. So there's a small bug there, but nonetheless, it's fine. So now we can carry on as planned. So I'll bring in the invoice table and the orders table. And with this one, what I've done is I've brought two columns. Okay. And this time what I'm going to do is match it to my specific username on the server. Okay. And my specific username on the server is a function. So if I go over here to the right-hand side, and if I go to my references, so user name, you can see here username is a particular function you can have, right? So you can essentially check to see if a particular name or employee ID matches a specific thing inside of the server setup. Another one you could use is full name. So full name is another good one you could use, and that's a sort of a pretty common one. So if I just go to my invoices table, let's just go to that first and make sure that I'm actually, do we have an employee name in this one? Here we go, salesperson. So you can see I am here, Tim Ngwena, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to check that column against my full name on the server as I have on the servers. Okay, so because this is on the invoices table, the next example will actually include the orders table. So I'll remove this for now. Add a column. We'll go and get the for the salesperson name, and we'll call this sales P. Go across sales P. It appears there. And I'm going to say equals, and what I'm now going to do is check my full name on the actual server. So sales person equals full name, calculation is valid. Now to preview this policy, I have to actually preview this as myself. I can't just preview it as a generic user. So what I have to do is go and preview this as myself. And if I go to the right-hand side, you should see that the only rows coming through are specifically for me. So here you are. These are all my particular sales, and that's working. So what I've done there is I've set up a policy that only lets me see my own particular cells. That's a pretty simple thing to do. But this would mean that anyone else who's coming on here, as long as their name on server matches the name here, then you're good. That's sort of the second example that we could do. Now, the third one is actually one that's more common, which is the entitlement table. So to do this one, I have to, again, delete this policy, because a policy can't be part of an existing one. And so for this one, I'm actually going to create a new policy. And this time I'm going to start with my employees table. And if I drag the employees table this time, and I drag it over to this side and I select it as an entitlement table, when I drop it there, you get a different dynamic because the employees table becomes the policy column. Okay, so the key thing to bear in mind here is that although I've brought the employees table in as an entitlement table, it is not currently part of the connection. So I don't have to make my entitlement table available to the end user to use in the virtual connection. That's probably the better way to say it. That's good for security and GDPR implications if you're in Europe or other sort of privacy concerns elsewhere, because essentially only Tableau gets to see that and an admin gets to see that, or creator who's building this. Okay. And then what I do is I bring in my other tables as policy tables. So my entitlement table goes at the top. My policy table goes in as normal, exactly what we've done in the last two steps. It's going absolutely crazy with errors here at the bottom. So I'm just going to ignore that for a while and just hope it works at the end of this. So now that I've brought my employees column in, what I need to do is essentially tell it how these two things match or relate. So the way to think of this is the data model. So which columns relate to each other if I'm using employees as the entitlement table. So what I'd want to do is see if there's an employee ID. There it is. And over here, that should equal the employee ID. There, perfect. Okay, and I do that again with the second one. So employee ID. Employee, can't spell, helps if you can spell, and hit close. So what we've basically done here is we've defined a policy that uses our employees table as an entitlement table, but then applies that to the policy for invoices and orders. Okay, and then what we can do over here is we can essentially check to see if the user who's using the server matches that particular employee ID. Okay, so I can just go ahead and type employee ID. Okay, equals, and hold on, employee. Let me double check this. Employee ID equals. What have I done wrong here? Why is it not coming up? Bear with me. I've just had a brief blank. That's all fine. That's a useful error. Employee ID. What have I done wrong here?
Is that supposed to be the username? Employee ID equals username?
I'm not sure. Hold on. Let me have a quick look at the employees table. So the bit here that matches my employee ID is just this number 5. No. The ID, it's just supposed to match against the ID. I'm pretty certain that's all it's got to do. Interesting. Okay, I'm missing a critical step, and it's escaped me entirely. There's a critical step here, and it's probably blindingly obvious. I've forgotten to tick something, or something's gone wrong here. But essentially, I'll explain what's supposed to happen at least. If I finish this calculation correctly, what will happen is that essentially I'll only be able to see the sales that I'm supposed to see using the entitlement table. Previously, what you'd have to do if you're using something like the data model is you'd have to essentially set up this relationship that would create, at least at query time, it would have to sort of query that particular user against the whole entire data set. Prior to when we had the data model, you'd have to create this massive exploded data set where every single row would be matched against the entitlement table. You'd create a sort of an exploded data set, and that would become your sort of data connection. And when you put that into the data source as a data source filter, when the user queried the data source filter would take care of the user entitlement and sort of filter things out that the user wasn't supposed to see. That had some issues because you could remove that if you had the right levels of access and then just see everything anyway. So that was always fiddly. With this, that's not possible because the end user doesn't actually have access to the entitlement table. It's essentially locked out to them. They only see the invoices and the orders table that they're supposed to see. So I can't for the life of me understand what I've forgotten here. I've forgotten something really basic. I don't think it's the username, or I hope it's not the username. I don't think it's the username, but nonetheless, I'll figure it out on Twitter, and
we can go to your website and catch it there. Yeah, I think you have a video there. So
the demo on YouTube is perfect. Trust me.
Yeah, we'll just watch it there. Don't worry about it. It happens. This is live, guys. This is real live.
Absolutely.
All right.
So just to sort of close that off, I think this is a really nice feature. I think it's definitely a version 1. If you go back to the video that Tableau released, if you just search centralized row level security and just look on the Tableau YouTube channel itself, there's a very old video. And in that video, they actually talk about everything they had planned for the roadmap. And that's sort of where I'm taking some of what I'm about to say now, which is one of the things I'd love to see be added to this is not just row level security, but column level security security, because in some markets, especially if you work in something like fast moving consumer goods, you might have certain metrics or certain calculations that you want to be visible to specific people and not other people. Or you might have one data connection that is then has lots of different policies applied to it that pretty much sort of orchestrate what level of access certain types of users have. Maybe they haven't gone through a certain training, so they only get access to a very sort of refined set of data with everything pre-calculated. And as they sort of evolve through their data journey, they have more and more of that data set sort of exposed to them through the policy setup. So that would be something I'd love to see, just as a very simple idea. I'm sure there's plenty of other ideas. We can chat about them in the Q&A a little bit later on. Okay, so the demo god struck today, and unfortunately I didn't get that working, but nonetheless, we'll sort of move on to the next feature. So the next feature is a complete change of tone. This is the multi-data source support in map layers. So for this, I actually have everything again in the browser. I'm going to keep everything sort of moving here. I'll go back to the list view because I tend to get lost in the grid view. And you can see that I have two data sets. I'll tell you where these data sets came from first. These data sources were really large shape files that I got from a London government data source, essentially. So one contains every single bus stop in London, and another one contains the entire road network in the UK for the we call it southeast, but we'll just call it the southeast of England, if that makes sense. It's not actually the southeast of England, but it's technically, geographically, the southeast of England. England has a weird way of sort of naming regions. So for this, I'm just going to go ahead and create a brand new workbook, and we're going to bring these in as quickly as we can. So let's go ahead and search for the bus data. This is our first data set. We're going to go ahead and bring that in. You could process both of these data sets inside of Tableau completely fine. I processed them in Alteryx because what Alteryx was able to do is create the extract a lot faster than Tableau itself could create the extract, because Tableau is running a slightly different set of capabilities to sort of process this spatial information. So especially for the road network, which you'll see in a second, you'll understand why I use Alteryx. So the road network is this particular one. The reason it says TQ is the UK is broken up into sort of a grid system, and T and Q are essentially this particular quadrant of the data. So I have two data sets, okay? And what I'm going to do is just visualize these straight away. So without doing anything else, I'm just going to go ahead and double click geometry. And again, this is in the browser. I'm not using any version of desktop. I do have a backup of it open in desktop if you see my Tableau desktop icon open. But as you can see there, that's the entire road network sort of visualized. I don't know how many marks. I don't want to ask because it is genuinely every road in this part of the UK. And for context, if I zoom out, you kind of get to see the bottom of England, as it were. So it covers London just about, and the top left-hand side of this is London. So what I want to do is bring some color to this so I can actually see some sense out of this, because this is just too messy. So what I'll do is I'll bring a particular label that tells me what type of road this particular road is. So let's go ahead and select the function color tab. And yeah, Tableau does a pretty diligent and I'd say fast, given the amount of data points, job mapping out all the different types of road. And now this makes a lot more sense. You can clearly see where London is right there. Okay, so that's our first data set brought in. Now, the next data set with map layers is going to be my bus data. So previously, if I wanted these two to be on the same map, what I would have had to have done is in Alteryx, I would have had to have somehow created a data source with all the roads and all the buses in one data source. And it wouldn't have really made any sense because the data setup for roads is completely different to the data setup for buses. The buses just need a simple lat and long as a particular point. But the roads surrounding those bus stops is sort of hard to sort of think how those would relate to the bus stops. It's not an easy thing to do. And you could have done this with like a dual layer, dual axis chart. But again, that would have been really slow and intensive because at least before this feature, Tableau was looking at those two layers in a completely different way. But with this, I haven't done any relationship. I haven't blended these data sources. These are two separate connections. I can just go ahead, go to my bus data, and I can double click Centroid, and it will sort of visualize this very quickly. And it will say, look, you're missing a link. And that's because it's trying to create some sort of blend, which is what you're not supposed to do. Instead, if I drag Centroid onto this little square here, it will actually overlay the bus data onto the road data. Okay, so I'm just going wait for this to load. Give it a second. It's thrown that little error in there. I don't know why it threw that centroid in there, completely random. Might be when I double clicked, but nonetheless, that's worked fine. Okay, so the next thing we need to fix is, this is not by any means a decent viz, so bear with me here. So now we need to fix this. The only part of this map that I actually need is this part, okay? And the reason that Tableau is zoomed out this far is because, of course, the road takes up this particular area of the map. So what you can actually do is you can go to the map layers for the road, and you can tell Tableau, don't base your zoom based on the road network, base it on the bus data, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the bus data here at the top, turn that into a circle, and we'll just see those dots become a little easier to see. There you go, they've sort of disappeared because the road network is the predominant thing. Then I go to the second one here, centroid, click this little drop down, and you can see there's this little tick box here that says add to zoom extent. I don't want the roads to be part of the zoom extent, so I'll just deselect that. And if I give it a second, Tableau will have a think about it. And again, this is a lot of data, and it will zoom in to just the area that occupies the bus data. So just give that a second. Did I double click it? No. Okay. And we're all good here. Yeah. Still thinking about it. I can see it's sort of spinning. I'll just move this down. I'll make the color red. If this continues to be this slow, I'll just switch to desktop, because the desktop is pretty much at this particular point. Okay. And you can see there's this tiny little data point there. The bus stop is just right there. And what it's missing is the detail. So let's go and give it every single stop name. And I believe I need to also add the virtual bus stop information, because that specifies what's going on. Okay, perfect. So if we just let that load, there we go. So when I hit that home icon, that just reset the zoom, and it now knows that this is all I really need to pay attention to. So what I can now do is I can drop the color here a little bit more. Okay, just drop that mark size right down. And what I'm going to do is zoom into central London itself. And I want to sort of disable a few things. I don't need the road network to be selectable. I definitely don't want that because every single tiny road will sort of pop up. So I'll go to the map layers option here, and I'll deselect the bottom one. The bottom one is actually this mark layer tab follows the order that you're supposed to see in the marks pane as well. So if I deselect the centroid, it will just hide the maps, the roads, and you can see the bus stops. If I enable it, but enable the lock, it will show the map, but stop me from selecting the map when I start to interact with the chart. Okay, so I'll select those two options, hit close, and I'll continue zooming in a little bit. Let's go right into central London itself. I just need to zoom in one more. There we go. And that will do. They're just fine. And then I'll just move this right into the middle here. So this sort of area is central London. I'll highlight that in a second. The last thing I'll do is just make this map a lot lighter. Maybe drop it down to 40%. That'll do. Just so it's faded out a bit more. And we'll make the marks a lot sort of smaller, so they're not as thick. The road markings aren't as thick as they are. And so there we go. We have a really sort of rich map. And I could probably, these are sort of tiny tweaks here. You could do this. Okay, make the circles a bit larger. So that's two data sets. What I can now finally do is add a third data set. And for this one, I haven't got it on server. I'll go ahead and go and grab a file from my computer. So you can see here that I have this spatial file, which tells me all the London boroughs. So I can just upload this as a zip file. When you upload spatial files on Tableau Online, they need to be zipped up. So everything in the zip is basically what you can see below here. So I'll just go ahead and click open. Tableau uploads it, it grabs it, and you can see that it's already available to us there. So now I'll go into my third file, no connection, no relationship set up. Go in here, drag that again into the view. And what you're now getting is the London boundaries mapped on top of everything. So we have 3 layers, all unrelated, just simply using the geographic context as a demo. So that's the first one. This is the second one, and this is the third one here. And with this top one, I want this to sort of go further back. So what you can do is you can just drag them down. So I'll drag it behind the bus stop. So the red bus stop should be above it. I'll set the color to be a lot more faded out than it currently is. Let's go to 30%. That should be about right. And we'll do a white border just so it's easier to see. And we'll keep it sort of selected because you might want to sort of know which these boundaries are. And then we'll give each particular boundary a name. I'll put it on label so we can actually see the labels when we make a selection. And so the final thing I'll do is I just try and understand how many bus stops are in the central part of London. So let's go ahead, select the radial mark, and I can just go here to the middle, start dragging it out. And because I've disabled my road network, it's not going to select those, yet it's part of my visual context. If you look at London from a map, the road is sort of intrinsic part of any city pretty much. And when I go ahead and make that selection, they remain part of that selection, but I can not only see the bus stops, but I can also see the boroughs that are part of those bus stops and how they intersect with the central part of the city. So this opens up a real sort of world of possibilities, because before, the detail had to be on the map. You couldn't just layer with stuff unrelated. Whereas with this, you can actually go and grab lots of different data sets and purely use them as context for your visualization, and then only have the top 2 layers as part of your main visualization. And of course, if you filter to these things and you've set your zoom extent to be only the layer that matters, it's always going to zoom in to the context that you have. It's not going to sort of be this sort of monstrous thing that just only ever zooms to the max extent, because everything has to be in context. And so that's map layers. It's a small feature, but I think it makes a big difference to this particular capability. I can't wait to see how people hack this as well, because you don't have to do any relationships to any of these. You could use the old trick of using map layers to sort of put maps on maps, charts on charts, as it were. This time you don't even need any sort of relationship, so you don't have to do any sort of complex thinking about positional systems and stuff like that, which essentially the old hack was using map layers, map as a scatter plot, essentially. So visualize a map as a scatter plot, use the coordinates to decide where things go, and then you could essentially visualize objects in that sort of grid system, as it were. That's essentially what the hack does. So people will, of course, use this to do lots of different things. Okay. So that's sort of some of the biggest features in 21.4. If I just go back to this list, we've covered virtual connections, centralized row-level security. I can't for the life of me imagine what went wrong, but as soon as this tug is done, I'll probably go on Twitter and post it. So just go to my Twitter profile and explain what I got wrong. It's going to bug me forever. And we've just seen the map layers, and of course we edited a published data source at the beginning of this as well. A few other highlights just sort of to finish off. Copy and paste. I was sort of disappointed by this. It's nice to have, but it doesn't quite behave like copy and paste. The way I described it to my friend is borrowing last year's conference moniker of copy and paste ish. It kind of copy and paste, but it doesn't work in every instance. So you're not going to use it like a copy and paste or like in every other sort of setup. Connected apps is a weird one because it's actually a huge feature, but doesn't really make a difference to you and me as everyday users of the product. But it will make a huge difference to people who build add-ons and extensions to Tableau. It makes it a lot easier for them to embed and connect things to Tableau. So that's going to be a really sort of nice quality of life improvement that will probably take a couple of releases to really see the benefit from. Of course, Slack keeps making an appearance. We've got a few other changes. The Tableau Exchange, the Tableau Accelerators, great additions as well to the community. I think the Exchange needs a bit of time to grow. I think this is sort of the App Store announcement, as it were, but it's going to take a while for the apps to really turn up and make us all really impressed with it. But for now, you've got extensions, you've got accelerators, which are essentially templates, and a bunch of other things already on the market that you can play with, stuff that we've already seen. Replaying animations is pretty straightforward. And all the rest is sort of small quality of life improvements, really, for that. So, yeah. That's it from me. Hopefully this is now a great time for questions, and I can have a break and still think about what went wrong in that demo.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect. But yeah, let's turn over to Homer. Homer, any questions that popped up?
We have a couple. Let me first turn to the people on our board that have questions. You had one, Kobe. Would you like to present it yourself, please?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Yeah, thanks, Dan. That was a great presentation, by the way. So appreciate that. When you're doing a data source online, does it allow you to create folders?
So you meaning here? So for example, is that in the published data source or in the virtual connection?
The published data source.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So if let's just do I have one here? Is it going to let me edit this? No, it's not going to. The reason it's not letting me edit this is I'm using the Information Lab test online instance because that has the data management add-on, and I don't quite have the right setup here, so it's not letting me edit this for whatever reason. So we will very quickly test this. I'm pretty certain you can. Everything you can do in desktop, you can definitely do in the browser. The big use case here was that they want you to be able to make a change in server without having to download the workbook. So everything you can do in desktop, you definitely could do here. So you could tidy things up. What I'm not sure about is whether they have changed the way you do that. So on WebEdit, the interface setup works slightly different in some instances. So let's just go quickly hop into my orders table. Let's just bring orders in, go to my Scratchpad. Go down. So you can group by folder. That's what I was worried about. So this option here, group by folder, exists. So when you do that, you can then go ahead and you can create a folder there. There we go. Perfect. So test, great, and then you can move stuff into it as normal. Yep.
So the key is the group by folder. Okay.
Yeah. So the key, this in desktop is in a different place to where it is on here. So if you group by data source, you see that option doesn't come up. But up until recently, that group by option wasn't there for WebEdit. So if you group by folder, the folders turn up, and now you can go ahead and do everything. And again, when you save this, it propagates down to everyone's workbook. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks. Appreciate that. Exactly what I was curious about.
Cool.
All right, Homer. Any other ones?
Yes, Dimitri asked a question in the context of row-level security.
Yep.
Enforcing security policies. Can you do this on a user group basis?
So when you say user group, do you mean a group? So let me be clear about what I'm saying. In a user group, you mean this grouping system, I assume. So I'm going to assume that's what the person means. So that's an interesting question. Let's go back to the interface. Actually, you can use the member of function. So if I go, do I have one open? No, I don't. Let me just go back into it. Edit the virtual connection. So continue editing. There's a function on Tableau server, on Tableau desktop, which calls a Tableau server to ask if the person is a member of a specific group. That is great. However, there's a problem with that, which is that the tables can't be part of multiple policies. So that would be good if you could have multiple policies, if that makes sense. So let me just show you that function. You can see I've got loads of tables here as part of that original policy that didn't work. It's just going to keep haunting me. So if I go over here, yeah, here it is. I'll just delete this so I don't see it again. So if I go down, there's this function here called isMemberOf. Okay, and the isMemberOf function returns true if the current user is part of a given group on Tableau server. So first you need to know that group. And then what you can do is you can take that group, put it in here as a sort of conditional statement, and then test against that. The problem is you're probably going to want to set up multiple policies for different groups to then control what they can see. Now, you could do that in one calculation. You could just be a mega calculation. For example, if is member of New York, then then you could do a test to basically say only show them New York, and you could keep on doing that. But I think what would be easier is just having separate policies to be able to go away and do that. So you can definitely do it with some sort of mix of calculations and logic. You just have to think through that logic a little bit carefully, and of course you can test it just here below. So hopefully that answers that question.
Very cool. Yep. Okay, Homer.
And David asks, could we see a small section of the roads data file? Could we get a sneak peek?
Yeah. So you're talking about this particular file. So I've got so many tabs open here. Apologies if you can hear my dog. You probably can't, but if you can, apologies. He seems to be spooked by something. So I am going to go back to this folder here. This is the road data source. So what I'll just do is just create a new workbook. And I will bring it in, but what I'll also do is go to it on my machine because I do have it. Go on. Tableau will let me select anytime today. So when you bring in a data source, I was hoping to see a little data preview window here, and it's not there because it's web edit. There you go. So I open up my backup and we go to the connection itself. So here we have exactly the same connection. What I was looking for was this icon in web edit. It doesn't have it yet. You can't do a data preview. It is coming in a slightly different way, but this is what the data looks like. So basically, it's a shapefile, which means each row has a specific what they call geometry. Okay, and the geometry is just going to be, in this case, it says line string. So basically, it just means like a line. But the way that that line is defined is a bunch of coordinates. So if I was to open this up in, let's say, Alteryx, or actually go into the text file for this shapefile, this one row would probably have 46 data points, each plotting the coordinates of when that line changes. So you can kind of see that visually on the map. If I zoom in to, I don't know how people have been to London or how well they know London, but like this data source is ridiculously detailed. I actually couldn't believe how many like little side roads exist in this data. So it's actually it's actually ridiculous, and it like the area that this road file covers is also obscene. It's not just London; it's the whole of the southeast of England. That's, for context, that's the bottom half of England. So you could essentially stitch a bunch of these up. Something I have to try one day is how many of these quadrants could I load into one file before Tableau just screams and dies. So we'll have to try it at some point. But it's incredibly detailed. Hopefully that answers that question, hopefully.
Yeah. I'm impressed by the performance too, just like even on the web.
Yeah. Like I'm on desktop, it's a little bit sharper, and I'm on a Mac, which is an M1 Mac, which isn't actually optimized to run this. What they're definitely doing is they're doing some clever stuff with the shapefile, because what they're not doing is it treats the object as like one large object. If I had all the information about each and every tiny road, what it would be trying to do is render things like the road names and render the points at which they meet. It's just treating it as one big object. So I think that makes it easier to process. It's just rendering a vector image, as it were, and it's zooming in and out. Once it's done it once, it doesn't have to do it again. But the more detail we ask it to show, like names and the separate roads, then that starts to increase the workload. So I think that's sort of what's going on.
Right. Cool. Very cool. Homer, I think we got time for one more. Oh, I'll mute there.
Chris, I'm not sure if we have another question.
Okay. Well, I have one. I'll reserve it for the last one then. So Tim, what's your favorite new feature? My
favorite feature, 21.4. I think I'm not going to say centralized low level security of virtual connections, because again, it does require the data management add-on, and that's a bit of a stinger because this should just be part of the everyday usage, right? The magic of Tableau has always been that an update comes out and everyone gets access to it, and that's always good. I actually helped Tableau do the announcement video, and in that video I said copy and paste was my favorite feature. But as I've highlighted already, I was a bit disappointed by that as well, because it's sort of copy and paste ish. So if I go back to the list, I think the multi data source support in map layers is I think it's one of those features where I can't wait to see what people do with it that I haven't thought of, not just in a mapping context, but in every other context, because a lot of these features, they suggest that other capabilities are going to come in the future. That map layers, I'm hoping, won't just be for maps. I'm hoping it'll be lots of other data types as well, so lots of other chart types, sorry. I'm hoping that comes across the platform, and I've sort of had indication that that might happen at some point in the future, no given date. So that to me is probably the most exciting. The rest are, I'm going to say, quality of life improvements. It's sort of an end of year release. The .2 and the .3 tend to have the really juicy stuff, and the .4 is just closing out stuff they said they'd release this year. So it does tend to sort of catch some stragglers, as it were.
Cool. Well, thank you again for spending your time with us today, teaching us as always. And
no worries.
And maybe we'll have you back again to show us, when 2022.1 comes out.
Absolutely.
The next release, we'll have you again. So this has been great.
I love your channel, Tim, on YouTube.
Thank you.
Good plug. By the way, yes, check them out on YouTube, guys. Also,
watch almost every other night, at least.
Yeah, there we go. You have fans on here. So visit tableautim.com, guys. Check it out. It's awesome if you haven't seen it before. So everybody give Tim a virtual round of applause. So thanks, Tim. Appreciate it.
No worries. Absolute pleasure. I'll figure out what went wrong in that demo on Twitter.
It's good. Yeah, it's going to sting for a little while. I know it's going to
It is. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. All right.
Good stuff.
So so hi everyone. I know we're we're running just a few minutes behind, but we'd like to do this next portion of our event will be for the networking breakout sessions. So what we have here is we're going to have two rooms, virtual rooms in the Zoom. We're going to have one called Ask Anyone Anything, and Kobe and Homer are going to be the moderators of that one, and Strategy and Adoption, which Amy and myself will be in that one. So if you're not familiar with breakout rooms, we're going to go ahead and open them here. What you're going to see down at the bottom, you're going to see a little breakout rooms icon at the bottom of your Zoom. Just choose which room you want to visit. And when you visit it, you can spend some time there, and you can even switch rooms. And we're just going to basically spend the next 15, 20 minutes talking about the various topics.